Williamsburg, Brooklyn, 2015. It's trendy and it's the place to be. Homeowners can't rent apartments fast enough to the now transient residents that occupy the area. But Williamsburg, Brooklyn wasn't always like this. At least not the Williamsburg, Brooklyn of this story, circa the 1970s. It was a very different place. It was a place you didn't walk down the streets after dark, and if you did, you had better have had some sort of weapon on you. It was the place I spent my childhood, I being Vittorio Guglielmo Pacici, Vito William Pacici. There's a mouthful. Later to be known as Vic Martino. I grew up living at 149 Ainsley Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. That's where I spent most of my childhood. But my growing years were spent on 85 Havemeyer Street. But this isn't so much a story about me as it is about some neighborhood people of the time. One of those neighborhood people was my mother, Rosie Bellucci, aka Rosie Bull. She was the kind of person who would help anyone, and most people that needed help came to see her. If you were having trouble with a landlord or any kind of personal problem, people went to see Rose, and Rose went to see some of her friends. And I'll get to them momentarily. My mother had an older brother, Joseph Bellucci, aka Joe Bull. He was a good man with a good heart, but he was a tough bastard. Everyone respected Joe Bull, and that included, I guess, what one would call the neighborhood wise guys. One of my most vivid memories of my mother's brother was when I was looking out our top floor apartment window, and my mother was yelling at me about something, and I sort of got a little disrespectful towards her. Well, the next thing I know, I'm hanging out the window by my ankles, courtesy of Joe Bull. Needless to say, I never mouthed it off to my mother again when he was around. Unfortunately, he died of a heart attack when I was still very young. I'll never forget how my mother was overcome with grief over losing her older brother, Joseph. She also had a brother, Johnny, and a brother, Carmine, who they called Maxie. She also had an older sister, Jean, my Aunt Jean, who was happily married for years to Charles DeMarco, my Uncle Charlie. Her younger sister was Anna, my Aunt Anna. She was the light and love of my life. She also passed on early when I was in my late teens due to a weak heart. You see, in those days, there were no pacemakers or defibrillators. Anyway, my mother, Rosie Bellucci, aka Rosie Bull, courtesy of her brother, Joe Bull, was married to a man named Emilio Martino, and they gave birth to my older brother, Michael Martino. Now, I don't know much about Emilio, as they never really spoke about him. All I know is he did some time in jail for being a bigamist. You see, while he was married to my mother, he was also married to someone else at the same time. My mother then met and married the man who was to be my father, John Pacici. They called him Jake, although his birth certificate states his name was Jack. It was a turbulent marriage because my father was a heavy gambler and a womanizer. By the time I was 6 years old, they separated. One of my earliest memories of my father was when he would come to take me out for the day via the neighborhood Llama Street subway station. He would never come all the way up the subway station steps. He would have me come down the steps to meet him. You see, he didn't want anyone to see him in the neighborhood because of his gambling debts that he owed to what were called Shylocks. If it wasn't for my mother, my father might not have been around any longer. You see, my mother had some very influential friends. Now, you might be wondering who they were. Well, some people might call them gangsters, some people might call them mobsters. But to me, they were just my mother's friends. One of those friends was James Napoli, Jimmy Knapp. He was a capo, a boss, in the Genovese family. Some might say crime family. I'll just say family. My mother and Jimmy go way back. She knew him a long time and worked for him for many years. As a matter of fact, if my mother wasn't a woman, she would have probably been a made man. I have this one vivid memory when I was younger of my mother telling me to stay out of her room and never to go into her closet and never to look in any one of those shoe boxes that were up there on the shelf. Well, of course, the next thing, you know, when she wasn't home, I go right into her room and I look into her closet and I look into the shoe boxes. And what do I see? Guns. All sizes and shapes, guns. And I remember thinking, man, my mom is cool. Another memory I have is one day we were just, watching television or having dinner, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door and the cops come bursting in to take my mother away. Well, I went and grabbed a baseball bat and went to clobber one of the cops, but my mother's, the cop, of course, was like, hey, and my mother's like, no, that's just my son, don't worry about it. But they were a little worried because I had a baseball bat in my hand to protect my mother. My mother wound up doing some time in Rikers Island, a weekender. And from there on in, Rosie Bull became known as Rikers Island Rose.
There's a place that I know where the wrongdoers go. Rikers Island, USA. With the warden and a guard that's as big as a lard. Rikers Island, USA. Yeah. Now I ain't complaining. It's 3 square meals a day. And you're inside when it's raining. There's really nothing on earth like Rikers Island, USA. Musical interlude. Rikers Island, come on. Rikers Island. Rikers Island, USA. Now I ain't complaining. It's 3 square meals a day, and you're inside when it's raining. There's really nothing on earth like Rikers Island, USA. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night.
When we moved from 149 Angel Lee Street to 85 Heavenmeyer Street, both located in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, circa mid to late 70s, Jimmy Knapp owned the building we moved in. We lived on the top floor, and underneath us was the Highway Lounge. Now, that was the place where all the neighborhood guys, aka wise guys, hung out. That was the meeting place. That was the place. The Highway Lounge was the place where Jimmy Knapp and his crew did their daily business. Now, his crew was, they had these nicknames. They didn't like to really use real names. And they had names like, the obvious, like Lefty. And then there was Chopper. No, it's not what you think. He ran a chop shop. And there was Ski Ball and Hawaiian Eye. One of my favorites was Mixed Up Junior. He was a mathematical genius. He was really good at counting money. But the only thing is you had to be really very quiet, because if you made any kind of noise, he would yell out, hey, you get me all mixed up. And that's how he became Mixed Up Junior. Then there was Sally Vigorigo. He used to sit right in front of the window of the Highway Lounge and sort of like a lookout and check everyone out that was in the neighborhood. And if he saw somebody that didn't live there or didn't belong there, he was like, hey, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Who's that fucking guy? What's he doing here? Where's he from? And then there was Sally's brother, Freddie Vigorigo. Freddie managed a very popular rock group of the time, Kool and the Gang. Well, there was a point in time where Kool and the Gang decided they wanted to get new management. It wasn't a good idea. They approached Freddie with that thought, and Freddie's response was to take the leader Kool aside and point a gun in his head and say, "How would you like I shoot your fucking afro right off your fucking head?" Afros were in style then, and you see these guys, they had a particular way of dealing with problems. Now, back to the Highway Lounge. As I said, that was the place where Jimmy Knapp and his crew did their daily business. I remember when people would come to see Jimmy. Well, he would never really talk business inside because of the saying, "the walls have ears." So he would go outside with whoever he had to speak with and walk up and down from one corner to the next, back and forth, until business was discussed, and then he would come back inside. And if he had to discuss business with someone else, he would repeat the same routine over and over again. Just take a walk from one corner to the next until they finished their discussion, and then they would come back inside, and my mother Rose was the one behind the bar, and she would have their drinks ready for them. During the day, the Highway Lounge functioned as a business meeting place when Jimmy was there. Then in the evening, Jimmy would leave there and stop at Creashy's, a neighborhood restaurant, before heading home. In the evening, it was usually one of Jimmy's sons, Lefty or Tony or Rocco, or all three, who would be there, and then it would more or less become party time. It was the place to hang out, and not so much for business, but to have a good time. My mother wasn't usually there then. She was mostly there when Jimmy was there. But there were times when I was there in the evening, and well, I have some fond memories. In 1986, the FBI came down hard on Jimmy and his crew. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, or as we call them, Forever Bothering Italians. They attempted to seize all of Jimmy's assets, but before they could, Jimmy sold the Highway Lounge and the place where I spent most of my growing up years, 85 Heathermeyer Street. He sold them both for a song, as the saying goes. He had no choice. They were really coming down hard on Jimmy and his crew. I guess the walls had ears after all. In 1988, Jimmy Knapp was indicted for conspiracy to murder. The murder victim was to be another capo of another crime family, and he was named John Gotti. Yes, the John Gotti, who was much more high profile than Jimmy was. Jimmy's style was to be as low profile as possible. Anyway, the FBI wanted Gotti for themselves. In 1992, James Jimmy Knapp Napoli passed away. It was truly the end of an era. A few years later, in 1997, Mama Rose passed away. I'll never forget that day. December 7th. A date for me that will live in infamy, like Pearl Harbor. As far as I'm concerned, that year we lost 3 great women. 3 great ladies. Princess Diana, Mother Teresa, and Mother Rose. She was preparing the tomato sauce, or as we called it, gravy, for our traditional Sunday dinner. My brother Michael and I were there as usual. All of a sudden, she had a breathing attack and couldn't breathe. Michael told her to lie down. I escorted her into the bedroom and placed her on the bed. I knew I was never going to see her alive again. I told her how much I loved her. I hope she heard me. I told her how much I loved her and kissed her. And then she was gone. Mama Rose was gone. Her funeral, her funeral looked like a scene out of The Godfather. They were all there to pay their respects. At one point, Jimmy's son Tony appeared, but he would not go near the coffin. He said he would rather remember my mother the way she was, full of life. At another point during the funeral, Jimmy's son Lefty approached my brother and me and asked what we planned on doing for her burial. When we informed him that we were going to have her cremated due to lack of funds, Lefty then walked over to some of the guys there and then came back and informed my brother and me that she was to be buried in a plot at Cavalry Cemetery, where most of her family was also buried, and it was to be a family plot with room for my brother Michael and myself when our time came. We couldn't thank him enough. So that was my story of my mother Rose and some of her friends. I only saw them at their best. I only saw their good side. They were friends and they were family. And that's how I'll always remember them.
All right, well, this is the spot where Sally Vigorigo used to sit. He'd be sitting right here, at the edge of the bar, by the window. And he was kind of like the official lookout. You know, he'd always be looking out the window. If he saw somebody he didn't know, he was like, hey, who's this fucking guy? This guy from the neighborhood? You know this fucking guy? Who's this fucking guy? Hey, come here. You know this fucking guy? Who's that fucking guy? Yeah. Welcome to the neighborhood.
Yeah. Last night's dinner?
Yeah. What's up?
What's up, man?
I'm Vic.
I'm Anthony. I'm new super here.
Okay, we're just doing a documentary about the neighborhood. It used to be what it is now.
Is your usual coffee shop?
Yeah, it's right next door to my house. I mean, now you got all coffee shops all around the neighborhood. One big coffee shop. Coffee shops and bars. But this is the closest to my house. Just a couple doors away. Plus, they make the coffee here. Okay, here we are. Now, this is now the Commodore. And this used to be the Highway Lounge. Now the place has changed a lot since then. For instance, this used to be where the bar used to be. The bar used to be here. And this is now a dining room. And the bar was in here. Okay, as we can see, this is the bar here at the Commodore. Pretty nice bar. Now the bar at the Highway Lounge wasn't here. It was in the other room. My mother was the barmaid, and we lived upstairs. And ever since I could remember, this place has been a place of business, like some kind of bar. I remember at one point, after Jimmy
When the Highway Lounge closed down in '86, it was a Dominican restaurant for a while. Then it was another Dominican restaurant. And then it was a place called Black Betty's, which was a very popular night spot at the time. And now it's the Commodore, which is a very popular night spot at the time. One thing about this neighborhood now, it doesn't lack bars, that's for sure. Plenty of bars. If you want to drink, come to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. There's plenty to drink here. Speaking of drinking, I feel like having some Jack Daniels. I don't know if anybody's looking. Okay, here we are at the famous Belmonte's restaurant. This has been here for years. A staple in the neighborhood, just like Creashy's was, but Creashy's sold the place. This is still here. And this is where Jimmy's son, Lefty Knapp, used to hang out. After Jimmy passed away in 1986, and you want to find Lefty, he was here. He might still be here. So I'm gonna treat the crew to dinner here, and we're gonna walk in, follow me with the camera. They might tell us to shut it, but that's okay. Because I wanna get, if anybody's in there that I know, I wanna get their reaction when I tell them who I am. Ready? Let's go. And if we can't shoot there, we'll at least get a good meal out of it.
They already looked out the window.
Oh, I know. I saw some guy there. Come on.
Thank God.
No, don't worry. I'll make sure you don't get the camera broken.
Say hi to everyone.
I will.
Please.
Hey,
Hi.
how we doing? We came here for dinner, but I'm also doing a documentary about the neighborhood. So I had to get, Belmonte's.
Thank you.
We'll shut it when we're gonna eat. We're gonna buy something to eat, so don't
All
worry.
right, go ahead. Help
We're not just,
yourself.
like, take it
Even
over.
if you don't want to. Just
No, we're definitely gonna have something.
photograph all you want.
We're definitely gonna have dinner here. This is the dining room. See, I still carry weight in the neighborhood. Anyway, this is the dining. Let's get a seat. Can we sit anywhere, or we gotta have reserved seats?
You got a reservation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Paulie, you got the reservation?
Yeah, I called yesterday at 4:30 in the morning. Anywhere you in at? Talked to a guy who talked to a guy who said it was cool.
All right, we are now in front of what used to be Creashy's restaurant, right here on Larmer and Concierge Street. It's no longer Creashy's, it's now Brooklyn Star. But this used to be the restaurant where Jimmy Knapp used to come and eat almost nightly after he used to leave the Highway Lounge. He would come here for dinner. Because at that point in time, his first wife, his nice Italian wife, was no longer around. She was deceased, and Jimmy was married to a showgirl named Jeannie. And well, one of Jeannie's assets was not her cooking. So Jimmy would be eating here nightly. And this spot here, in front of Creashy's, right here, this is the famous or infamous spot where Jimmy Knapp gave his son Tony the beating of his life. I mean, literally, he beat the living daylights out of him. And this was the spot where it happened, and it was the talk of the neighborhood for years.
Was it during business hours? Did Jimmy interrupt his dinner to beat his son, or?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. Like, I didn't witness it. I just heard about it, and I don't know what it was about. Tony did something that really upset him. Okay, now this is the Larmer Street subway station where you get the G and the L trains. And my father used to meet me here to take me into Manhattan, and we'd go to dinner and see a movie, whatever. But whenever he came to the neighborhood, he couldn't come up the subway steps because he owed the bookies, the loan sharks, he owed them money from his gambling debts. So I used to have to meet him down here. He'd be down here waiting for me. And he would be right about here and not come up any further. He would be like something like this, and he'd be like, come on down. Hurry up, get down here. Okay, now, this is 569 Larmer Street. This is where my beloved Aunt Anna used to live. And I used to go to school a few blocks away at PS 132. They would send us home at 12 o'clock in the afternoon for lunch. And I'd come to my Aunt Anna's to have lunch. The neighborhood's just as noisy now as it was then. And I would come to my Aunt Anna's for lunch. She didn't know how to cook, so she made what they used to call Swanson's TV dinners. And I'd have lunch here, then I'd go back to school at 1 o'clock. Then after school, I'd stay with her here until my mother came home from work. And in retrospect, Those are some of the best dinners I ever ate in my life with my Aunt.
So Vic, tell us a little bit more about some of your family members, like your Aunt Jean and your Uncle Charlie.
Oh yeah, my Aunt Jean and Uncle Charlie. Well, they used to live in Queens on Parsons Boulevard, and I was a kid, and my mother used to take me to their house. I used to love going there because they had a colored television. Not many people had a colored television in those days. It was too expensive. And they had a cuckoo clock and a talking minor bird named Joy. Hello, hello. My uncle used to try to get it to say something else, and all he did was say hello. And my uncle was like, "You stupid bird." But yeah, I used to love going there. And they had two sons, my cousin Anthony and my cousin Sammy. And yeah, at some point in 1978, my Uncle Charlie was diagnosed with lung cancer. And my Aunt Jean, who had been ill, she actually passed away before he did. And I firmly believe she just didn't want to see him pass away. And she passed away before he did. Then a year later, in '79, my Uncle Charlie passed away. Not only my Uncle Charlie died of lung cancer, my father in 2004 got lung cancer, and my brother Michael in 2009 passed away from lung cancer. And they were all heavy smokers. So I want to tell all you people out there who smoke, stop.
Cool. All right.
All right, now this is 149 Ainsley Street, and this is where I grew up as a child before we moved to 85 Avonmere Street. This is where I used to live. And I used to live right there on the second floor. On the right-hand side here, those last two windows. And this was my neighborhood. Okay, now this is 172 Ainsley Street. And this is where we used to live before we moved across the street to 149 Ainsley Street. And I used to live right there on the top floor, third floor. And that, actually, that top floor, that's where my Uncle Joseph, Joe Bull, hung me out the window by my ankles. Right there on that top floor, I'll never forget. He passed on when I was still very young. I was like 9 or 10 years old. I'll never forget the day he passed away. My mother got the phone call, and I was sleeping, and you heard, this is what I heard, "Bull died!" And I fell off the bed. Yeah, he was a good man. I wish he had lived. The family would have been a lot closer had he lived. But I still remember him to this day as a giant of a man, like Paul Bunyan. And like Paul Bunyan, he's become a legend. There's some great stories about Joe Bull. I remember my Nana told me a story of the time he was working as a bouncer in a nightclub in Manhattan. And while he was working, he sees this pimp beating up, smacking around his whore, you know, beating her real bad. Joe Bull would have none of it. He went over, literally beat the crap out of the pimp. The pimp wound up crapping his pants. Actually, he pissed his pants. My Nana told me that the pimp was wearing like a velvet suit, you know, and everybody that was watching, because, you know, a crowd gathered around, they saw the pimp piss his pants, literally, and everybody was like, "Ah, the pimp pissed his pants," and the pimp ran away, never to be seen again. I think he wound up in Jersey somewhere. Anyway, Bull, my Uncle Bull, Joe Bull took the girl, took her to a diner, he bought her something to eat, he talked her into going home, and he even gave her the money to go back to Missouri, or wherever she came from. That's the kind of guy he was. Now, my Uncle Johnny's wife, my Aunt Louise, told me a story at the time. My mother and her sisters were great singers. My mother used to sing around the house in Italian while she was, you know, cleaning the house or cooking. And she used to, I remember her singing to Jimmy Roselli records. That's an old Italian singer. And my Aunt Anna in particular had a beautiful voice. I remember her, when I was a kid, she sang on a tape recorder, and she sang a sad song so sad with such feeling that I started crying. And she had to switch it up and make it a happy song so that I would, you know, be in a happy mood. She didn't want to see me crying. I wish I had those tapes of her singing. She had a great voice. Anyway, my Aunt Jean also had a great voice, had a beautiful singing voice, and she actually got a job professionally, singing professionally in a nightclub. Well, when my Uncle Bull heard about this, he didn't want her in that environment. So the night of her debut, he comes barging in the nightclub. While she's singing on stage, he goes up on stage, picks her up over his shoulder, takes her out of the nightclub and takes her home. Now, I know that might sound cruel, but he was just very protective, maybe overprotective of his family, especially his sisters. You know, my mother and her youngest brother, my Uncle Johnny, they were so close until the very end. I mean, I remember growing up going to my Uncle Johnny's house in West Babylon, Long Island, visiting him and his family. And my Uncle Johnny used to always come to my mother's place, visit her until the end, until she passed away in '97. And he passed away a year later in '98. And then there was the older brother, of course, Uncle Joseph, Joe Bull. But there was also a middle brother. His name was Carmine, and they called him Maxie. I remember him vaguely when I was a child. Then not long after my Uncle Joseph passed away, Maxie disappeared. We never saw him again. And then after so many years, he paid my mother a visit once. He knew he was dying. I don't know if it was cancer or whatever. And he came to, you know, say goodbye to the family that he neglected for so long. And I remember my brother Michael was very upset. He's like, he came just to die, get my mother all upset and sad. And sure enough, not long after that, he did die. Now notice with him, I say he died. Everyone else I say passed away. He was dead even when he was alive. And to this day, whenever anyone neglects their family, I say he's doing a Maxie. He's pulling a Maxie.
Vic is a special human being in a lot of different senses. His sensibility toward film and the people he looks up to are different from my generation. So the way he comes at an angle and things with a story it's just different than I'm used to, and it makes me appreciate. You know, I don't like calling him an elder, but he's an elder to me. So I like listening to other people's stories. So he started telling me all these little bits and pieces of these stories, and I'm a writer and a musician, and I write songs, and I just thought there were so many good little stories. And I asked him, you know, can I start to write some of these stories down? And I literally took them and jotted down a bunch of notes, and then I slowly just, you know, reintroduced his own life to him.
Recycle now. They better recycle when I was growing up. All of a sudden now you gotta recycle everything. This is it. This is the apartment. 85 Evermine Street. Oh yeah. Here's a picture of the late great Frank Sinatra to the Highway Lounge. All the best. Frank Sinatra, 1977. Here we are. This is 85 Evermine Street. Oh, who's that?
Here you go, Joey. It's bigger than last week's. Hey, Crystal. The room is empty. Come on, time is money.
Thanks. Phil will be very happy.
Yeah, send him and John my best, huh? Good night, Heather.
Good night, Les.
So that growing up, you were kind of around a lot of outlaw figures, people who were maybe on the wrong side of the law.
Yeah, you could put it that way.
Did you yourself personally ever have any run-ins?
With the law?
Yeah, any run-ins with the long arm of the law? With John
actually, yeah, I did one time. I was on the West Coast in California, and I was crossing the street there, and I remember a cop stops me and writes out a jaywalking ticket. Now I'm from New York. I'm like, jaywalking? So anyway, I forgot about it. I don't know. Weeks, months went by. Now I'm driving on the highway, well, they call the freeway out there. And cop stops, he pulls me over. I don't know, I'm speeding or ran through a red light, whatever. And then he comes back and he says to me, you got a warrant for your arrest. I'm like, what? He puts me in handcuffs, takes me. It turns out the jaywalking ticket turned into a warrant, right? So I'm in the jail cell, you know, wait to see the judge or whatever it is. And some guy from a Mexican street gang comes up to me and goes, hey man, what you in for? I said, I got a jaywalking ticket. He said, oh man, this guy got a jaywalking ticket, man. So I'm like, oh, right? So the next guy says, Hey, what are you in for? Attempted murder. You know, so, yeah, that was my only brush with the law, because that kind of lifestyle wasn't for me, you know? I mean, especially at that time, I considered myself somewhat of a ladies' man. Ain't no pussy in prison. All right, right. Oh, now you're being a hammer on that. Now you don't want to leave. See, now she wants to be on camera now. Hey, Renette, this is my story, not yours.
So, Vic, you used to be a singer?
Oh, yeah, I used to sing for a while there throughout the 90s. I sang in a lot of the New York nightclubs, which there used to be many at the time. It's kind of the tail end. By the 21st century, you know, the year 2000, a lot of them were gone. But yeah, I used to sing there in New York and Manhattan and Atlantic City and Las Vegas and Laughlin, Nevada. I used to sing what you used to call the, American standards from the American Songbook, like Frank Sinatra, Dee Martin, Bobby Darin, a lot of those type of singers.
You think you can give us a little sample right now?
Well, let's see. As long as I'm singing, there's a bell up in my brain keeps ringing, making a crazy ding-dong. And if the band don't desert me, there's nothing on this earth that can hurt me, long as I'm singing my song. Because making music means more to me than a pleasure. Me and music, we go together like notes in a measure. As long as I'm singing, the world's alright and everything's swinging, long as I'm singing my song. Thank you, I'll be here all week. Hey mama, don't you treat me wrong, come and love it daddy all night long, alright. Hey, tell me what I say right now, tell me what I say. That's what I say. Good night, everybody. It's been a great crowd. I love you. Okay, see this photo here? Now, this is a photo taken around 1977. As I said, this is at my Uncle Johnny's house in West Babylon, Long Island, circa 77. And this picture I posted on Facebook. And this brought the Bellucci and the DeMarco families together again. That's one of the good things about being on Facebook.
Cool. Nice.
What do you give to the woman who has given all her life and love to you? What do you give to the reason you are living? I could window shop the world before I'm through, and nothing would be good enough for you. Mama, a rainbow. Mama, a rainbow. Mama, the sunshine. Mama, the moon to wear. That's not good enough. No, not good enough. Not for Mama. Mama, a palace, diamonds like doorknobs, mountains of gold to spare. That's not rich enough, no, not rich enough, not for Mama. Mama, lifetime crowded with laughter, that's not long enough, no, not long enough. What can I give you that I can give you? What will your present be? Mama young and beautiful, always young and beautiful. That's the mama I'll always see. That's the mama with love from me. That's the mama with love from me. I miss you, mama.